You all for coming. I'm very happy that we have a distinguished panel of speakers today. And I will start with the first speaker because he has to leave to another session, Professor Alexander Buzgalin. He is economic professor at Lomonosov Moscow State University, Director, Center for Modern Marxist Studies, Faculty of Philosophy, visiting professor, Cambridge and Peking Universities, Editor-in-Chief of Alternatives and Questions of Political Economy, Editorial Board, World Review of Political Economy and International Critical Thought. His biography: he is one of the leaders of the post-Soviet school of critical Marxism. His articles have appeared in Cambridge Journal of Economics, Science and Society, World Review of Political Economy, International Critical Thought, and Review of Radical Political Economics. His research interests include comparative economic systems, transitional economy, political, social, and geopolitical dynamic in modern Russia, globalization and its discontents, problems of modern imperialism, exploitation of creative activity, role of macroeconomic planning, and selective state regulation in modern economics. Sasha Buzgalin will treat little-known workers' participation in management in the USSR and in Russia's 50 collective firms today, most of which a sociological study finds to be socially and economically effective. We met about 2 weeks ago in Moscow at the 200th anniversary of Karl Marx's birthday. There was a conference at Moscow State University, and I'm very glad that he accepted my invitation to be on this panel. Professor Buzgalin, thank you.
Oh, thank you very much for invitation. It's a big honor and big pleasure for me to be here with you. And this is a really great question, and very important and very difficult question. To talk in the United States about US as empire is not simple. And all time when I'm trying to ask people who likes empires, and we have now more such people. In Russia, the whole fashion is now interconnected with this conservative wave. And I think understanding of empire in Russia, in the United States, and classic understanding of empire center of, as a system in imperialist world is different. So I want to stress, first of all, some features of new imperialism, which are important, I think, for understanding of the question. First of all, main aspects of this system, which were stressed in classic work of Lenin, imperialism as the highest stage of capitalism, are still relevant, but relevant in new sense, in new content, with new content. Not qualitatively new, but relatively new content. What are the changes? I will start from the not very important changes, but still. Object of imperialist domination now is not semi-agrarian or maybe 90% agrarian countries with feudal economic relations and superstructure, as it was before. It was sometimes even pre-class societies, feudal societies, societies with Asian mode of production. Now the object of imperialist aggression and domination of empires is a country, typical object is country with industrial material basis, capitalist system of production relations, and adequate forms of superstructure, sometimes authoritarian, sometimes formally democratic. This is new reality. And for these countries which became object of domination of the center, many features of classic capitalism described in Das Kapital and first volume are absolutely adequate. I can give you example of Russia as object of imperialism. In some aspects, Russia is subject, but it is object at the same time. They have domination of transnational corporations in our country. And if you walk through the main street in Moscow, Tverskaya Street, you will see names of all US-based transnational corporations, Europe-based transnational corporations, and so on. Nothing Russian. and this is only formal example. There are some examples which are more essential. Second, the form of domination of the imperial power changed. And now these forms are based on the power of new type of capital. And here we are moving to the third feature, subject of imperial domination. This is not simply state, as it was before, national state, which express interests of the capital. Now this is transnational corporation integrated with state. Corporations integrated with state. It's another subject and another type of domination. These corporations are also not traditional corporations in all sense, in all understanding of this category. This is not even imperialist integration of bank capital and industrial capital, as it was described in Guilferdin writings or in Lenin's writings. This is domination of financial capital over capital of real sector. And process of financialization is absolutely well known. And if we have such domination of fictitious, virtual financial capital over material capital, capital in real sector, and this financial, virtual, fictitious capital is integrated with the state, this is a new phenomenon. And forms of domination, mechanisms of domination are also new, relatively new. This is a system of indirect manipulation by market methods. I want to stress this. Before, imperialist domination was based mainly on the force, direct violence, direct domination. Now, means of motivation, mechanisms of domination changed, and this is now mainly quasi-market mechanisms, or at least market is form of such domination. Corporation is now a network which can control life of the people through different market mechanisms, starting from finance, because all incomes now has financial form. It is not more agrarian country with peasants who cannot even calculate. India in 18th, 19th century was a country where majority cannot calculate. They even didn't know what does mean money. Direct violence, direct extraction of the surplus product, not surplus value. Now this is organized by market population, and financial domination means domination over the people's brains, behavior, motivation, values, and so on. Second, market motivation and creation of market of simulacra, market of science. And people are determined by necessity to buy simulacra, not jacket, but label Hugo Boss, not car, but car with brand, not drink, but dangerous drink, Coca-Cola, yeah, okay, unhealthy, and so on and so far. All life became determined by market, and market became totalitarian force. When I first write market as totalitarian force, people said, you are crazy, Buzgal. You came from Russia, everybody is afraid of totalitarian regimes, and you decided that market is totalitarian. I put one question. Please tell me, was it simple or not to oblige all Soviet people to come to the party meeting and to sit 2 days in weekend from 10 to 10 talking about communist ideas? They said, oh no, it was impossible even in Stalin period. I said, but market made this. People are coming for 12 hours to shopping centers and spending all holidays, all weekends in these centers. They're determined by market strongly than it was determined by Stalin's dictatorship. And this is not joke. This is reality of life everywhere, from US till China, including Russia, India, and so on. So this is new form of domination. And because there is unequal system of labor costs and quality of labor and productivity, there is also unequal exchange. Samir Amin made a good job when he wrote about world law of labor, and he showed that, generally speaking, abstract labor created in the periphery and abstract labor created in the center has very big difference, if I can say so, in very primitive way. I will use only one example to show what does it mean in imperialist rent. Driver of the truck in India will have wage $200 per month. In the United States, maybe $300,000-$400,000 per month. The same, absolutely the same labor, creating the same result, 10 times difference. And situation is even more complex because in the center mainly you have not job of trucks drivers, you have job of the people who are creating useless things, who are creating simulacras which are object and subject of operation in fictitious financial sector. And they have the biggest resources, the biggest wages, the biggest financial assets, actives. So that's why it is new mechanism of domination, which has form of equal market exchange, formally free competition, but really it's form of domination and manipulation by financial corporate network capital. And this capital became subject of domination through national states. And what is important, this system created world rules of the game. And here we can come to the question about United States. United States during last 20 years as minimum, maybe even more, is not national state more. United States is a global actor who is creating world rules of the game. Rules of the game for the world. In all spheres, financial system, dollar. In Russia, we keep our savings in dollars. The same in many countries, except maybe China. Maybe. Huh? United States creates rules who is democratic, who is not. If you decide that Libya is not democratic, you can bombard this country. If not you, but the United States bosses, transnational corporations with Washington. Let's use the word Washington. If Washington decides that Yugoslavia is not democratic, and Serbia in particular, it will be bombarded. By the way, if in Gorbachev period anybody will tell that it will be war in the center of Europe and NATO countries will bombard independent state in the center of Europe, everybody will say, you are Stalinist. Stupid Stalinists who are talking about old style of imperialism. This is not in agenda more. They have new world. Gorby, US, we are friends forever. Maybe you remember this whole generation. So, this is Washington, NATO are creating rules of the game. And they play a role of world policeman, world court, and world Ministry of Justice. And the rules are created not even by government, not by Bush, Obama, Trump, but global capital in general. And these rules are they are organizing world life. What we have as a position? We have different forces, but the most well-known now became Russian state. Why? Not because Putin is protector of democracy, not because Putin and our government is protector of peace, justice and so on. Not. We have very unjust system, terrible social polarization, stagnation in economy, and a lot of contradictions in internal life. But first time in the history of last 25 years, national state said to NATO countries, to Washington and Brussels, guys, we will not follow to your rules. And if you do something what we don't want, you will have bomb and your face will be in blood. And we're strong enough to do this. Go on. It was first time during last 25 years. In Crimea, in Ukraine, in Serbia, in Syria. That's why all establishment became so angry. Why? How can you do this? We are Ministry of Justice. We are court. We are police. You are hooligans. simply hooligans, and we will punish you. But even with punishment, there are some problems. Because punishment became not profitable for US and EU business. It is exploiting Russia, and to make real sanctions is not profitable for them. It will restrict opportunities to take profit from Russia. So it's not good for Russia, but for the Western corporations also not good. That's why these sanctions are so small and not very strong. And mainly this is blah, blah, blah. And we have fictitious virtual capital, and we have fictitious virtual, and we are lucky to have fictitious virtual war. United States creates image that in Syria you have only victories, including victories over the Russia. And all attacks are organized in order to create show. The same in Russia. All attacks, all war, all system of organization of conflicts between troops and so on, organized in order to create show. Simulacra. We are selling simulacra, we are creating simulacra in geopolitics and ideology everywhere. So in Russia we have total domination of the idea that we have only victories in Syria, and United States are nobody and cannot do anything in Syria at all. And Russia created peace and punished hooligans and world terrorism. And without Russia it will be only terrorism everywhere. Only Russian government can protect the world from terrorism. In the United States you have absolutely the same. Washington is the only protector of the world against terrorism. So this is simulacra in politics and geopolitics. And all this is created by this specific type of global capital integrated with world police, world court, world ministry of justice, and world propaganda ministry of propaganda like CNN and all other, Hollywood, by the way, and all other things. If you look carefully on Hollywood movies, all are made on the same basis. Strong Russian soldier who is brave, honest, will protect democracy everywhere and will kill everybody, and nobody will be killed from United States. I was going here by airplane, and I spent 1 hour and 20 minutes watching a movie, Cavalry, Horse Riders or something like that. It's about victory of United States 11 soldiers who defeated all Afghanistan, Taliban, and no one person was wounded only. Yeah. So a great movie, absolutely. I decided to watch it completely from the beginning till end because I couldn't believe that it could be done. It was done, yeah. And it's not only this, it's everywhere. So not to make jokes, to summarize, what we have now. We don't have US as national state who is center of empire. We have a new type of imperialism where global, fictitious, financial, virtual capital integrated with other forms of capital. These interstate and superstate political structures, ideological structures, cultural structures, manipulate over the world by new methods, which has market form but not content, and creating mainly simulacra images of real domination, and in the same time extract huge imperialist strength in reality. Not the image not of domination, image of democratic, peaceful solution of all contradictions, and in reality extract huge imperialist strength, not even surplus value in world style, and not simply profit. So this is my vision of modern situation. Thank you. So, and because I have to leave, unfortunately, in schedule I'm in 2 panels in one time. Yeah, I'm very sorry about that, but I promised half a year ago to be in the panel on workers' cooperatives, and we have interesting stuff in Russia. So I have to leave. I will write down my email. I have stuff on this new imperialism in English. It was published, I think, in International Critical Thought. Oh, yeah. If I'm not mistaken. So, and let's be in touch.
Are we allowed to ask questions?
Yeah, maybe a couple of questions.
Yeah, I will be glad to answer. Yeah.
You seem to be saying that the only thing that stands in opposition to U.S. empire, or sorry, Western empire, is Russia. But what about China? Unless I misunderstand you.
You do not misunderstand me, but I made mistake. I was talking about Russia and I forgot to add about other actors. I said there are different actors including Russia and started to talk about Russia. So, but first of all, there is China. Yes, it's true. I was many times in China and every time I told them, China now play a role of the actor who is not marionette in the hands of the Washington. Not puppet, not marionette. Yeah? I don't know how to say in English. Puppet. In the hands of Washington. But in the same time is not independent actor. In China there is a problem. When two tigers are fighting between each other, a smart monkey sit on the hill and wait what will be the result. So China is smart monkey, but sometimes if you're too smart, the tiger which is stronger will come to the top and eat you monkey. So sometimes you must help to the, maybe not tiger, but dog who is fighting against tiger. So that's why I think now China must make a choice. Or finally it will be eaten by imperialism. It's still not strong enough. It's a huge country with big economic potential, but still in the sphere of propaganda, army and so on, it's not so strong. And what is the most important? China is determined by US based corporations in style of life. Mentality of people are determined by US style market. Main pleasure is to go to the cinema and see Hollywood movies. Main pleasure is to come to a superstore and to buy American jeans. The main dream of elite intelligence, elite students is to come to US and work here. And this is more important than economic power even. That's why I think China is not strong enough if China will not propose alternative, real alternative. There are some hopes with China. And second, or third, Russia, China, and third main force which can be. This is a world civil society. Until now, this is very important, but from another side, impotent. I'm sorry, girls, to say this, political and social force. When I was in the World Social Forums, it's 50,000 people, 5,000 organizations, but politically they are very big. If this movement will be integrated with one or another country, if we have in Russia not far-right Putin, but left democratic leaders, if China will be not formally socialist, but really socialist, if we can have union of world civil society with one or another strong state with nuclear weapons and with big financial economic resources, and it will be real alternative. And one word in addition, it will be final panel how to prevent escalation of Cold War at 4 p.m. If you have time, please, you can come. And I will talk on this panel about old experience of peace movement of 1960s, 50s, 60s, which was created with big support of Soviet Union, with big bureaucratic problems, but it was huge movement of millions all over the world. And finally, it led to the decline of nuclear weapons. It was disarmament, real disarmament. And without this movement and without bureaucratic, authoritarian, terrible Soviet Union, it was impossible to have this movement. So now I think time for more or less similar project. But this is another question.
I've heard when the United States doesn't like somebody, they cut them out of the SWIFT payment system. Is that part of the mechanism of control of the West and Wall Street?
Yes, of course. And moreover, because we have virtual money, those who control internet control all financial system. I will tell you, if one day our money are living now here, if one day anybody will say, internet, go out, we will lose all our money. Yeah, it's not a joke. This is problem. Yeah, and you know who controls really supercomputers, who are, which are material basis for the all financial operations. This is not, virtual money is virtual money. There is no gold There is no paper. There is nothing except supercomputers which are under the control of concrete people and institutions. Yeah, I'm sorry, I will put here for operators.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. I will write here my email for everybody. Yeah, this is for operators because I want to have it for you. I'm sorry.
I got you.
Yeah, please write.
That's why I'm late. That was impressed. You going to the fundraiser tonight?
Please don't forget to write a few words to us because this is really very important for us to be in touch. Okay? This is my email. Uzgalin@mail.ru.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, and again, sorry that I leave you not because I don't. Please send me materials. We will put on the website what you are debating here. Okay?
And that's available to us? We can find that? Paper?
Paper, yes. If you know, better please write me.
If we
I will
email
send
you, we
Yeah,
can get
I will
that.
send you the note.
I'll
Okay?
tell you how to get it probably. If you go to Science Hub, you put it in DOI and you can download the PDF,
Okay.
okay,
What's a
for
DOI?
free. That's the way you can get most PDFs. Go to Science Hub, which was a creation, I think, of a woman in Kazakhstan, and that's how I get papers. You don't, if you're not attached to an academic institution that subscribes, that's how you get papers.
Right.
So go to IC, International
Just
Critical
email
Thought, and look at their, their papers, and then you get the DOI and put it in, go to Science Hub. And if you have a question, email me, you have my email.
Yeah. Okay, let's continue. Since my computer is connected, I think
Why
I'll
don't
go
you go?
next.
Yeah.
And then my other colleagues. And Ahmad, you can also join the panel?
I'm fine.
You fine? You can, okay. All right. Okay, I don't know if you can see that projector, but I am, no, you're not. It's very weak.
Let me turn the lights on. We can't really see.
They're all off, so, yeah, maybe these can help.
They're off. Oh, they're
off.
off, yeah,
Oh,
exactly.
yes, you turn it off, you turn it on.
Oh, damn. Sorry about that.
Okay. Yeah, those are the lights, I think. Yeah, I'm co-chair of the International Committee of the Green Party US, also member of the coordinating body of Maryland United for Peace and Justice. I like to start with history and everything. This is a review paper, so to start the discussion basically, so you guys can have some topics to talk about, and my other colleagues will also add to this. So when we hear the empire, we usually hear about the British Empire, which basically, well, we had Spanish and we had some other one, but the British Empire, I think, is quite important because they affected a lot of what's happening today. Because of, as a result of the end of the First World War, the Versailles Treaty basically drew these fictitious countries in the Middle East that we hear their names every day in the news, and we wonder why things are like that. The source is at the Versailles Treaty. This is how they created them. So there are some, I want to put references, because here we are at the university, so in case people want to take references. There are two good books about this. Well, actually, one is the actual whole treaty, but the other one is A Peace to End All Peace. Basically, this is what Versailles Treaty did. And it created these artificial countries in the Middle East that it's a whole subject of lecture. Then, of course, then we come to the end of the Second World War, which again, these three superpowers of the time divided the world, and as it is today. There's a new documentary by Oliver Stone called Untold History of the US. he actually said things that I had not heard before. He said at this conference in Yalta, these three guys actually were writing names of countries in small pieces of paper and trading them. So,
like Monopoly.
yeah, so basically, this is how, for instance, Roosevelt took Iran. I'm from Iran originally. And then Stalin took Czechoslovakia. This is how, so then, as a result of that, I want to mention, when in '53, US does a coup in Iran, Russia says nothing, because they had already given Iran to US in Yalta. So this is, the kind of deals they did that is still effective today. So then, I go quite fast. After that is actually the beginning of the US empire. So now we have a situation like this about US military bases, that they are kind of like, there are these tentacles all over the world, the globe. So another good map is this one, where it actually shows all the Pentagon commands. I mean, Pentagon is not just for the US. Pentagon is for the world. It has a command for every continent. So basically, like, well, they're running the world, so this is how, I mean, it's the easiest way to say it. This is a good map. It has all the US bases around the world. It's like about 1,000 bases. There has been no country in the world history who has had this kind of aggressive posture. I mean, this is amazing. There are other maps I can show you. Another one is this one. Here's another one. So here's like what Chalmers Johnson says, the military bases are the new imperialism. Basically, this is how he's defining it. Here is another reference, that's his book, Sorrows of the Empire, Militarism, Secrecy, and the End of the Republic. So then, these days you hear a lot about Russian intervention in US elections. Well, media forgets to mention all the times that the US has interventions around the world in elections. So according to a study, US intervened in 81 foreign elections between 1946 and 2000. And US has invaded 70 nations since 1776. US has killed more than 20 million people in 37 victim nations since World War II. Another good reference is Killing Hope, William Bloom, US military and CIA intervention since World War II.
On the International Committee.
Oh, yes. Another statistics here, the cost of war in the number of Iraqis slaughtered in US war and occupation is about 1.5 million. And the number of US military personnel officially is about 5,000. Number of international occupation troops, 3,000 and a half. The cost of war in Iraq and Afghanistan, $1.7 trillion since 2000. Now here's another reference I want to mention, John Perkins, Secret History of American Empire, and he also wrote the Confessions of an Economic Hitman. He would go to countries and offer them aid in the form of World Bank IMF loans. But these loans always had strings attached. Privatization, neoliberalism, basically this is how. So if they would accept it, then they become a good, friendly country. If they don't, then there are certain steps that it would be taken. Like they would send jackals to do a coup. They used to do hard coups. Now these days they're doing soft coup d'etats. I'll mention those later. Another good reference is Devil's Game, how the United States helped unleash fundamentalist Islam. This is playing the religion card is actually what the US learned from the British. The British were very good at this. I mean, when Gandhi went to the British and said we wanted independent India, they said, oh, which India are you talking about? There are 4 Indias. Indias of the Muslims, India of the Sikhs, India of the Baluchis, India of Hindus. So finally they managed to get 3 countries out of that, which Gandhi wanted one secular India. And now US does this, Shia Sunni, sectarianism, Shia Sunni. I'm from the Middle East. There wasn't such thing. There was no bloodbath over sectarianism. This is all created and fabricated from here. Okay. Here's some good statistics. Military spending nations. You see top, the blue line, way ahead is the US, the winner of all these numbers. After that is China, then Russia, far distant. Then Saudi Arabia, France, UK. Now here's another one. It is one. Per capita divided by the population of these countries. Again, US wins. You see the first one. It's way up compared to the other. US, then NATO, then Russia, Middle East. China is at the end. So another comparison is Afghanistan war versus world military spending. You see that, for instance, there is Afghanistan war compared to China's total military spending. Okay. Now we come forward in time. The Soviet Union falls. So this group of neocons, neoconservatives, they come with this idea of the project for the new American century, PNAC. They said, well, we are now the only superpower in the world, and we better act like it. So we need to take over, first of all the resources, all the energy resource areas. So they immediately invaded Iraq, Afghanistan, they went to Libya. Then the plan was to jump to Syria and Iran, which, as Professor Buzgalin mentioned, now we see China and Russia stopping US in its steps. So this is what is different now, that there are not unipolar, multi-polar world. This is what is happening with Russia. Now I'll mention later the BRICS. This is basically the US foreign policy, full spectrum dominance. William Egdahl, totalitarian democracy in the new world order. This is what the neocons said. This is exactly now the US foreign policy today, because the neocons have taken over. They actually managed to make, what we call the deep state. They have actually managed to make Trump follow it. And as another reference, we see Chomsky says, who rules the world? So, okay, then resistances start happening. Countries start resisting neoliberalism. When the US was involved in Iraq, Latin American countries, Venezuela, Bolivia, Brazil, Argentina, Ecuador, Honduras, Paraguay, turned leftist one after another. They paid off their debts to World Bank, IMF, and cut their tie. So that was the first resistance. We call it socialism in 21st century sometimes. But they're basically resisting neoliberalism, and the BRICS countries were formed. BRICS stand for Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, 2006. That was a big blow to the empire. Here's the leaders of the BRICS, the joint picture. So after the Iraq invasion, then the US starts attacking. So empire strikes back, okay. They go one after another at these BRICS countries, one by one. They managed to lower the price of oil through their puppet regimes like Saudi Arabia, to hurt the economy of Russia, Iran, Venezuela, that are mainly oil exporters. So then, to bankrupt Russia, Russia sells oil and gas through a pipeline from Ukraine. They wanted to bankrupt Russia, they want to stop that. So they caused trouble in Ukraine, and they wanted alternatively to pass the pipeline from Middle East through Syria to Europe. So they caused trouble in Syria. So Syria and Ukraine are related this way. The rest is propaganda. I mean, the rest that you hear. So, but now, as I said, and we now have Russia stopping the empire in Ukraine and Syria. Oh, by the way, they came up with TPP to destroy China. That was Obama's plan to destroy China, was TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership, which luckily did not pass in the Congress. And Trump didn't like it in the beginning. Now they are pushing him, they're pulling him into liking it, like everything else. So then Russia and China started trading. They opened their own banks, and they came out of World Bank, IMF, and they started cutting usage of dollar. And there is now even talk of a new currency called petro, cryptocurrency. Just Venezuela suggested this last year. So this not using dollar is a great blow. This was actually Gaddafi's crime, because he said he's not going to sell oil in dollar anymore. And you see what happened to him. He also wanted the United Africa. So they got rid of him. Another thing they're doing is that they're going to build a railroad from Beijing to Portugal through Russia, because US and NATO, they control sea routes. They are very good in putting sanctions and putting blockage in the sea, but they cannot do that in this road. So that is a good idea for them to have the route. They call it the Silk Road again. So, okay. Here I put some stuff from the Green Party platform. That what is that we can do? Like progressives. What should we do to resist this empire? And I go fast through them. We should recognize sovereignty of nation states. I mean, that's one thing that empire doesn't like. It doesn't like independent states. We need to emphasize closure of foreign military bases, permanent repeal of veto power in the UN, urge all governments to sign the ICC, International Criminal Court, declare a no first strike policy, declare a nuclear-free world, prohibit our arms sales to foreign nations. I mean, like, you see, they're talking about this Iran nuclear deal. There is never mention of Israel. I mean, Israel has nuclear weapons. Then nobody tells them what to do, but they go after Iran to, are you building one? You know, well, I mean, Iran has 10 times the population of Israel. By logic, if Israel has 300, Iran should have 10 times that, but there is no logic in this. So, another one is about World Bank, IMF. But very important one here is the BDS, the boycott, divestment, sanction of Israel. Now, this is biting, it's growing fast. You see, I even heard Natalie Portman, who's an Israeli actress, refused to go to Israel to a festival. And before that, Stephen Hawking, I know he refused to go to Israel. He also refused to be knighted by the Queen. And
Shakira just
yeah, that's right. Shakira just recently.
China just said it's not sending labor over
Okay.
like yesterday.
Very good, very good. But in Europe, it's taboo, like in Germany. Even the Linke, I was badgering the Linke people, the left party of Germany. In Germany, they cannot criticize Israel in any form. This is crazy. I mean, the Linke people are here because of the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation. There are some panels with those. But it's taboo. I mean, if anybody wants to say anything in Germany, France, Switzerland, it's taboo. They cannot say anything. Now, I mentioned that deep state is putting Trump back in line. And military industrial financial company, as you know, Professor Buzgalian explained it very well, how things are global capital financial. And this is the result of this global capitalism, is the global wealth inequality. I have a short clip here I want to show. I hope you can hear it. So, here at the Left Forum, you all probably know Professor Richard Wolff. He mentioned, well, he has written the book, Democracy at Work, Cure for Capitalism. He mentioned Mondragon so much that I went to Mondragon. And I toured the place. This is really an example of future socialism. I mean, what we can really count on. It was probably based on the anarchist models from the Civil War in Spain, started by a priest actually, but it's a network of 100 co-ops that they members own everything. So they select the managers every year and all that. There is no firing in the last 50 years. So this network has to support each other. If one goes down, all others have to absorb them. Like they had this washing machine factory called the Fagor. It couldn't compete with China. I mean, they were using robots. China was using cheaper labor. So this company had to shut down, but nobody was fired. They all absorbed them in other co-ops. So this is their secret of success. It's a great way. I mean, you can talk to Richard Wolff here. He promotes this place. And it's a good example of what can work, because we always say there was no democracy for socialism and models, but this one actually is pure, very democratic. I mean, everybody owns, so it's a basic definition of socialism. Workers own the means of production. I mean, that's the basic definition of mainstream Marxism. So here's that network. With this, I finish my talk. So if there are any questions, I'll be glad.
Could you just clarify, is that the article or the paper that was up before you started? Or is this your own personal
No.
presentation?
I went to Mondragon. I got material from them. I have actually, I gave a talk in another Left Forum. It's on YouTube. If you like, I can send you the link.
No, just that whole
No.
that slideshow that you've shown us. Is that yours, or is that
the
was
clip?
that?
No. That clip is somebody's work on YouTube. The global wealth inequality.
The whole slideshow you've been showing us.
You mean the clip?
The
The video.
No, like since you started talking,
Oh.
we've been looking there at
Oh,
this
mine.
PowerPoint. Is that yours, or is that the previous professor's?
Oh, this is mine.
Oh.
No. Professor.
Okay, I thought it was,
No, he didn't use
I thought it was
slides.
Andy.
No, he didn't. This is mine.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Professor Buzgalin had no slides.
Okay.
He just spoke. Sorry. Yes.
So, this is a very specific question, but what is the difference between worker co-ops and workers owning the means of production? Because I think there's a difference.
Yes. I refer you to my talk on Mondragon because there are different co-ops.
You're gonna explain it?
There is
There's a
a-
difference, because workers owning the means of production, I know there's a difference when we talk about it in our class, and I don't exactly understand what it is, that's all.
Well, this is basically well, there are different definitions of co-ops.
Oh,
There are some that are like just a supermarket, like you have a
right.
co-op.
Park Slope Food Co-op,
Right.
which I belong to, the largest in the nation, 17,000.
But they don't produce anything. They just
Right,
share.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
These are production
Okay.
co-ops.
That's the difference.
Then we also have banks, the credit unions. Then we also have student co-ops, which I lived in. NASCO, National Student Association Cooperatives. So there are different models. But in Mondragon, everything is a co-op. It's 100 different types of co-ops interconnect. This is a secret. They support each other. So when a co-op goes down, the others have to absorb it. This is why they're still working after 50 years. Shall we connect you? Okay.
Disconnect, and
Yeah.
I'm going to be very brief.
Okay.
I was invited at the last minute, so I respect that.
Okay.
Actually, should I introduce myself? So.
Oh, I need to introduce you.
Oh,
Sorry,
all right.
I actually have.
You introduce me,
yeah.
I'll look up
You
for you.
look it up. I actually brought introductions
All right.
for everybody. Yeah.
Whatever.
Okay, that. Dr. David Schwartzman, my colleague at the Green Party, he's running for DC Council at large as a candidate of the DC Statehood Green Party, affiliate of the National Green Party, as an eco-socialist. He attended the Eco-Socialist International in Venezuela. He's Professor Emeritus, Howard University, biogeochemist, and environmental scientist. He has a website with his older son, Peter Schwartzman, solarutopia.org. He has publications that include Life, Temperature, and the Earth, 2002, several recent papers in Capitalism, Nature, Socialism, Advisory Board, Science and Society, CNS, Institute for Policy Research and Development, and his Gmail is dschwartzman@gmail.com.
Trying to find the connection here.
Okay, what? Video?
This is, no, I don't need any video. This is, oh, yeah. Actually, I want to I can't resist saying something regarding the media, because I was actually in Beijing about a month ago with Alexander Bosgalin at the Second World Congress on Marxism, and I watched a lot of movies on the way too. One was the Black Panther, and there's some very positive elements that people have observed about that film, but the collaborator and enabler of the Black Panther was a CIA agent. There's a subtext to that movie that you should watch it. And again, Hollywood or whatever has injected that message.
Star Wars.
In the movie, yeah. So it was just an observation.
It's
I
amazing.
can't resist saying.
Yeah, I know. And I was just in Russia, and in Russia they show all Hollywood films dubbed in Russian, so everybody watches it. When a Russian film comes here, it's subtitled. People don't watch it. So, and then they see all this propaganda, mostly James Bond. James Bond has a propaganda that's only US and Britain are good. The rest of the world are terrorists and evil. And
Ian Fleming was the CIA, I mean, MI6
so,
agent.
Oh, that's
okay,
my
good.
cat.
That's good. Okay.
Mousy Pants, my wife named it. You can't really see it very well, but we adopted a mother and daughter from Baltimore. So we couldn't just take one. But since I opened my PowerPoint, I'm going to just show. I'll be very brief. Really, what I'm focusing on in resisting empire is how we need to connect the struggle to the challenge of catastrophic climate change. Okay? This challenge which my two sons and my granddaughters and all the children and grandchildren in the world are going to face. And it's really critical of what we do in a very short time from now. Because we have very little time left to avoid going above what, because of the global south, pushed this at the Paris Agreement to limit warming at 1.5 degrees centigrade from pre-industrial. And that's still possible, but just barely. And so what I'm going to go into is really how is empire and imperialism central to confronting that challenge. That's what I'm talking about. Of course, a byproduct is preventing war and preventing nuclear war. And also, I'm convinced that if we are successful, we will open up the path to the end of the rule of capital on the planet. I'm a green socialist, an eco-socialist, Bahram said, and I think this, we need a strategy to do this. And I'm very proud of the Green Party and Jill Stein's Green New Deal, because that's actually elements of a real strategy. And Howie Hawkins is running for New York State governor. the Green Party is not only socialist, but I think there's a growing current of eco-socialism informing the perspective of the Green Party. So I'll just begin as a, all right. So this was actually, I gave this to a class in UDC. I'm a retired professor at Howard University, but I gave this to as a visiting. I'm going to go. I already talked a bit about this, but one of the areas we need to connect to in terms of doing away with fossil fuels and replacing them with wind and solar is the huge cost to humanity from our addiction to fossil fuels, and one is the millions of people that die every year from air pollution and the lack of clean energy in the world. $5 trillion a year in subsidies to the fossil fuel sector, including indirect. This is actually an IMF study, and the global military budget is even less than that. It's like $2 trillion, a little less than $2 trillion a year. So those two figures really show that we have the global capacity to end the addiction of fossil fuels and go to a new path for humanity. My oldest son, Peter Schwartzman, and I are coming out with a book. Carrington and I, my oldest son, went to Cuba last June and an agroecology tour, and we included, some of your photos are in the book. We credit you. So our book is called The Earth is Not for Sale. It's really an imperative. The Earth should not be for sale. But it outlines a science-based consideration of energy, climate change, agroecology, and prefigurations that we can build to a path, eco-socialist path for the world. That's really the content, and should be out in a few months. And you can get a paperback and PDF and so on. Okay, so here I'm going to skip most of this in the interest of time and really go to what's the main obstacle? Well, I don't know if you could see this slide very clearly, but it's a statue of a baby sitting on a tank. And I got it on the web, and I think it was in the mall in China. So I call it the military-industrial fossil fuel nuclear state terror and surveillance complex, or MIC for short, also AKA the Molochian instrument of carnage, or Moloch of mass murder. That's from William Blake, I believe. And also Allen Ginsberg's poem, Moloch, well worth reading again. I read it in high school. The critical challenge of demilitarization, Eisenhower's speechwriter put it very well. By the way, anyone interested in getting a copy of this, just send me an email and I'll send you a PDF. So why is the MIC the biggest obstacle to preventing catastrophic climate change? That's C3, catastrophic climate change. It's, first of all, it's the core of global capitalist capital reproduction with a huge waste of resources, material and energy and so on. It's integrated with the fossil fuel nuclear industry, the military-industrial complex, almost by definition. It's a dominant role in setting domestic and foreign policy with the U.S. as Bahram, documented already. They called the Oil Protection Service for the U.S. imperial agenda. Actually, Mike Clear used that term and was actually used before that. It's really for the transnational capitalist class itself. Whose phone is that? You're listening? And here's one of the most overlooked aspects that I think is essential. The military-industrial complex and its imperial agenda around the world, as Bahram has documented, blocks the global cooperation that's necessary to implement an effective prevention program. Okay, to reach the to actually reach much higher commitments in reduction of carbon emissions that came out of the Paris Agreement. Those are, if we simply accept those commitments, we're doomed. They have to be much more aggressive. So is the Pentagon the biggest source of carbon to the atmosphere? There are many claims of that you find on the web and articles. It's the Pentagon being the biggest source. Actually, it's misleading. And I'm not downplaying the terrible role of the Pentagon, but it's misleading to claim the military bases around the world, which are about 1,000, that all those carbon emissions is the biggest cause of climate change. No, it's like less than 1% of all the global carbon emissions, and that's been documented. Sure, I mean we should close down those bases, but it's again the more important challenge is to create the possibilities of real cooperation in the world and shift this terrible burden of resources and finance, nearly $2 trillion, to human needs and the needs of climate justice around the world. So I'm almost done. And so I've already made that point. And here, I'm actually going to close with this slide. That's Alex Hanaud climbing up an overhanging cliff with no rope. I guess a lot of us feel this is like we have to overcome the myth and dissolve it. I feel like Alex Hanaud. I mean, I get dizzy just watching a video. That was a cover of National Geographic. He's standing on a ledge in Yosemite, and he climbed up with no rope. Okay, the guy's insane. But so what I would just conclude with is that if we connect the dots of the movements and synergize our efforts to disarmament and peace human needs, we have to see the challenges. One, we have to generate a global subject that can contest transnational capital and fossil capital most of all, and make this transformation. And I would submit it's the millennials, the young people. The burden is really primarily on you. Our gray-haired folk will help you, but it's going to be the young generation that's going to do it globally. So I'm looking at this guy, I'm looking at the younger folk. My two sons, my younger son's 35, so it's part of his burden too. My older son is like 49. He's already transitioning. Anyway, that's, I'll conclude with that. And Tony, I'm done. So,
Thank you.
That was like 10 minutes. I'm going to get that off.
Well, I'll introduce Dr. Granovich. Okay, our next speaker, also Green Party comrade, Dr. Anthony Granovich is Associate Editor of the Journal of Labor and Society. His BA is from Columbia University in European History, and his PhD is from University of Pennsylvania. He authored Race and Class Politics in New York City before the Civil War, 1998, and edited Willard's foreign policy writings, Oswald Garrison Willard, The Dilemmas of the Absolute Pacifist in the Two World Wars, 1983. His most recent referee publications are The Global Significance of the Russian Revolution, Imperialism and the Socialist Resistance, Journal of Labor and Society, 2017, and Crushing Strikes Through the U.S. Military, 1875 to 1915, Working USA. The Journal of Labor and Society, 2015. From 1999 to 2001, he chaired the university seminar on the city at Columbia University. He teaches U.S. history, U.S. government, and Western civilization courses at the Borough of Manhattan Community College of the City University of New York. He's on the bargaining team for a new contract for his union, the Professional Staff Congress of the City University of New York. Dr. Grant.
Thank you, Thank you, everyone. I apologize for being late. We were vetting candidates running for office down at the Union till 1:30, so I had to deal with the train system. I also ran for mayor on the Green Party in 2005 and 2013 in this city and came in fourth. I didn't miss a day of work, and I spent less than $1,000. I attribute it to a natural green constituency in the city, which of course is growing as the ecological crisis that David so well put is intensifying. Now, I would like to deal, I'm a U.S. historian by training, and I just finished a manuscript on, it's called The People's History of U.S. Foreign Policy. And we have to deal with a paradigm. It's all about paradigms. I'm thinking back to The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn, which came out in the 60s, which was wonderful. If you want to build a factory run by steam power, you have to have the right model. You can't use the Ptolemaic model. You have to have the Newtonian model. If you want to understand some of the inconsistencies in the Newtonian model from Newton, you'll have to come up with another model, and that was the Einstein. So we've had three models in physics. Well, I'm positing a third paradigm for the U.S. history, and that is the notion of full spectrum dominance. This is a panel on resisting empire. The United States, from the very beginning, was always interested in empire and ruling the world, and that can be demonstrated, I think, amply. So, I begin with the preface. I'm going to read it because I don't want to, for saving time, we need some discussion. In June 2000, the Pentagon produced a position paper, Joint Vision 2020. You can look it up, Joint Vision 2020. It called for the United States to attain full spectrum dominance in all military spheres that included land, water, space, and outer space. George Bush Jr., and he graduated from Yale, and he was a Skull and Bones fraternity member. I will get to that in a second. His election as U.S. President that November, and 9/11 in September the following year were pivotal steps toward achieving that aim. After 9/11, as part of the plan, the U.S. engaged in endless wars, Bush quote, "The U.S. now spends more on its nuclear arsenal than all other countries combined." So it's the most serious threat. The aim of global domination has been a constant in U.S. history. Before the birth of the Republic, General George Washington commented in 1783 as he rode his horse through New York's Westchester County, "Surely this is the seat of empire." 4 years later, with empire in mind, the Constitution was written, and I teach American government, so I spent half the semester on the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. I agree with one point Romney raised in his second or third debate with Obama, namely that the foundation of American government is the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Now, what does that Constitution say? With empire in mind, the Constitution was written, Article 4, Section 3 grants Congress the power to make new states out of conquered territory. In theory, the entire world, according to U.S. law, could become states of the United States. Non-contiguous Alaska and Hawaii demonstrate this point. In the 19th century, the United States added states through genocide against native peoples and the massive torturous use of African slaves that generated the surplus value that became the global capital essential to transform this rich land into an industrial powerhouse by 1860, when Lincoln was elected, and that prompted the Civil War. By then, the number of slaves exceeded the United States population in 1790. This war between the states was fierce because most whites, as today, North as well as South, were racist and did not want to compete with black slave labor. Enough whites were persuaded through Lincoln's skillful leadership to support the war because they believed that this union of states was worth preserving, even though they wanted little to do with black people except as slaves. And the book to read, the recent book, 2014, Edward Baptist, The Half That Has Never Been Told. Baptist as in for the Baptist Rockefeller or the Ku Klux Christian Baptists, all connected. British investment was key to the success of this imperialist project. The Constitution was barely a decade old when the British bank, Baring Brothers, lent the capital necessary to purchase the Louisiana Territory that became the 14th states. Before the 19th century ended, the United States was strong enough to simultaneously engage in successful conquests in the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans, namely the Spanish-American War. So confident were U.S. plutocrats of their potential for global conquest that President William Taft, and he became a bonesman, as they call them, in 1878. He boasted in 1912, "The day is not far distant when the 3 stars and stripes at 3 equidistant points will mark our territory, one at the North Pole, another at the Panama Canal, and the third at the South Pole," end quote. He fulfilled the dream of poet Walt Whitman, who was also a racist, but we'll get into that one. And imperialism and racism go together, who, on the centennial of the Republic, crowed that by 1976, quote, "There will be some 40 to 50 states, among them Canada and Cuba. The Pacific Ocean will be ours, and the Atlantic mainly ours." He echoed Navy Commodore Matthew Perry, who declared in 1856, quote, "The people of America will, in some form or other, extend their dominion and their power until they shall have placed the Saxon race upon the eastern shores of Asia." And then I say, to trace the evolution of this drive to rule the world, I begin with the Spanish-American War, when the dream of Asian conquest was partially fulfilled with the bloody conquest of the Philippines, which killed hundreds of thousands of Filipinos and is still going on today with U.S. support of Duterte and on and on. I urge you all to come to the demonstration tomorrow at 11 a.m. I can give you the details after. Filipino anti-imperialist students marching tomorrow. Anyhow, so I'm going to read, since I, at the very last minute, that's why I'm not on the program, was asked to be on this panel, so I'm going to read the introduction to this essay, which people have said is the best essay. It's being assigned at Australia, City University, the beginning of the global significance of the Russian Revolution. With that, set it into motion. And the subtitle is Imperialism and the Socialist Resistance. It took the genocidal World War I to inflict on Europeans firsthand the bitter fruits of supporting the imperialist national character of their respective ruling classes that battled one another for control of the world. The entry into this great war by U.S. Democratic Party President Woodrow Wilson, whose 1916 campaign slogan for his second term had been, "He kept us out of war," only to lead the U.S. into war on April 1917, April 6th, a month after he was inaugurated, signaled that the Russian people had favorably responded to Vladimir Lenin's April thesis that demanded peace, bread, and land, or maybe land first, and all power to the Soviets. The Bolsheviks were presented with an incredible opportunity to reconstitute the Russian imperialist state as multinational socialist republics, while Western and Japanese vulture capitalists sought to crush them. In the new millennium, Russia and China are united in pressing for a multilateral world to replace the US and the UK attempt to set a unilateral standard based on a belief in Anglo-Saxon global supremacy. The major reason that China and Russia can do this arises from the legacy of the Russian Revolution, and I trace that in the course of the essay. I should point out that in 1899, Joseph Chamberlain, who was Neville Chamberlain's father, who was the foreign minister of England, proposed to his German counterpart, Bernard von Bülow, that we divide up the world, the transatlantic branches of the Anglo-Saxon race and the mighty Teutonic races, is how he expressed it. The Germans said no. They were not going to play second or third fiddle because Britain, France, and the US had already divided up pretty much the world that they were able to divide at that point. Remember that Britain had the greatest empire the world had ever seen by 1914. And they said no in both world wars. Now, as soon as the revolution occurred, the British and the French, I discovered, were busy dividing up southern Russia 1 month after the revolution. So France, Germany, these old Europeans were the imperialists. Of course, the Spanish were the first, but they didn't use it to modernize their society. And that's complicated, the difference between Catholics and Protestants. But the US entered the war against the Bolsheviks. Wilson sent 12,000 troops in 1919 to invade Siberia along with the Japanese. Now, fortunately, the American general in command, and I rely on military sources in a lot of the work that I do because the generals are not going to lie. Problem is you get this information 50 or 60 years later when the archives are opened up. Then you go back and piece it together as it actually happened, okay? And William Graves, appropriately, Dickensian name, his surname, wrote a book called America's Siberian Adventure. And you can get it online. And you can read how I was sent under false pretense to go into Russia. To protect the Czechs? No. I was sent in to crush Bolshevism, as the British and the Japanese were doing. So we go to the 20s. The purpose of Hitler, as he stated in Mein Kampf, I got a chance to read Mein Kampf. It's like, don't throw me in the briar patch, says Brer Rabbit to Brer Fox. Don't read Mein Kampf. In Mein Kampf, you have the secret to what Hitler was thinking about when he said that on page 139 of Mein Kampf, with England alone, it was possible, our rear protector, to begin the new Germanic march. Okay, that's 1925. So everybody who knew anything could read. And he talks about the Jewish communists and the gypsies. I mean, his excessive racism was embraced by the American ruling class down the line. And they covertly funded it. The evidence is all there. So it's a question of putting it all together in 125, 150,000 words, because I can have a big manuscript. I'm cutting it down just for that. So this is what we're dealing with. And of course, Stalin in 1931 said we have 10 years to do what the rest of the world did in 50, otherwise they, meaning the imperialist powers, will crush us. And of course, they did it. Russia in the 1930s industrialized at the fastest rate in history. And then we come to Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in history. People forget about this, 1941, June 22nd, 1941. 4.5 million men on a 1,900-mile front, the distance between northern Maine and Key West, Florida, invade Russia. And it's not just the Croats and the Slovaks and the Hungarians, if you know what Hungary is doing today. It's chickens, you know, it's coming back, deja vu, Groundhog Day in a bad way, coming on, so in a lot of Eastern Europe. And fortunately, Hitler went after Stalingrad, which was right on the verge of the Caspian Sea, where oil had been discovered in Baku in 1842, and the greatest battle in history. 6 months, 1.5 million dead. They were fighting neighborhood by neighborhood, building by building, room by room, hand-to-hand combat. The Soviets beat the mighty Teutons. So this was a tremendous victory. Another great reason why Stalin is demonized, because he's the one who changed the course of history, because everybody in the West, including Hanson Baldwin of the New York Times, said those Slavs, those Oriental savages, you can read the Times in that period. One has to do research. I tell my students it's all about 3 R's: reading, research, and then writing. And most, as Craig Unger said, House of Bush, House of Saud, it's all in books. So I can go on literally for hours, days, detailing this. I would take exception to one thing I heard our distinguished first speaker, who had to leave early to attend a simultaneous presentation, that the Vietnam War, and I went through it, okay? I have good genes and I keep in shape. I'm ready for the action. When the going gets tough, I get tougher. And these are tough times, mainly for my students, for a lot of people in this country. And you know, we have the potential to change things now if we drop our neoliberal support for Clinton and of course for the fascist Trump. But people forget how that campaign was conducted. We can go into it. But the Vietnam War, the draft was on, the military draft. So a lot of the wartime opposition was based on that, number one. Number two, we had a 18-year-old vote taken out. We had 18-year-old vote, constitutional amendment, put in the early 70s. So that the reason why the war was won, because no country, no people in history had to deal with what the Vietnamese dealt with. More bombs were dropped on Vietnam than all the wars in history put together. 14.5 million tons. People forget that. It was the National Liberation Front of Vietnam, supported, of course, by China and Russia, who supplied the aid. And the U.S. ultimately lost, even though the government was involved in the assassinations of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and Jimi Hendrix and John Lennon, destroy the anti-war figures, and Jim Morrison, whose father was the head man in the Gulf of Tonkin when that false flag operation. And people forget about Operation Northwoods. I have a review coming out in the Journal of American History in September. Operation Northwoods, March of '62, Joint Chiefs of Staff, which is the heads of all the military, the 5 branches of the military, suggested, came out with a paper because Kennedy called off the air cover in Cuban invasion. So Cuban socialism can thank Kennedy for having saved it by not following through on the invasion with U.S. invasion, as Johnson did in '65 in the Dominican Republic. They suggested shooting down an American airliner, Operation Northwoods, planting bombs in American cities, and blaming it on Castro. So they'd have it's a false flag again, pretext to go in and take it out. Of course, the next year he was taken out. One of the people he fired in the land here was, 3 men were fired. One of them was Cabell, who was the Air Force chief, in March, and he was fired after the Bay of Pigs in April of '61 from the Joint Chiefs. His brother was mayor of Dallas. I'll let you fill in the blanks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ahmed, would you like? Okay, well then, let's open for discussion.
All about empire.
All about empire.
And of course, Che Guevara killed Walt Rostow Johnson, Walt Rostow, named Walt Whitman Rostow. I didn't know that much about Whitman then, but now I find it appropriate. Because he was a racist and an imperialist. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Is there a sort of a common thread between the two? I see 2 different kind of speeches. I don't know if there's a, and then my question is more related to the present and the near future, and where do you think the next 20 to 50 years, or how do you think they're going to shape up?
It's going to get worse and worse.
I'm mostly concerned about the environmental climate change issue, but either you can
Well, it could get very worse, but I'm not, I am not a pessimistic as Tony. Saying categorically it's going to get worse and worse. I think we're at a great bifurcation in the future. We either, 20, 30 years from now, I don't think it's just going to go along, pretty much the same as now. It's either going to get a lot worse or better. And it's really contingent on building a global movement, and of course that's contingent on building national and local movements too that make that possible. But a global subject that could actually contest the military-industrial complex, transnational capital, and be a player in global politics and make. I want to say one thing about China since it's been mentioned. I think China could be a leader in the whole future of humanity. Not with their present path, which is, I would say, my view is, from what I learned, is that it's pretty much state capitalist in its political economy. However, it's a land of huge contradictions because China is the leader in the world in building renewable energy, by far now. It is still investing in coal in Africa, so it's doing both at the same time. What will determine the future of China is class struggle of the people of China. Because what I saw, what I witnessed was there is socialist consciousness of millions of people. Not that I talk to millions of people, but my conclusion is that there is this consciousness, the heritage of their history. There is consciousness of socialism, and so there's intense class struggle going on that mostly is not being reported. Strikes and resistance and so on. So that's going to determine the path that China goes forward. And that will, I think, determine which way the world is going to go, given all those factors.
Yeah, I wanted to add, Samir Amin considers China still socialist. And he's going to talk through Skype, I think, later in Ms. Gallen's panel.
Well, let me just mention one other thing. David Harvey is also here. He gave 2 presentations in Beijing at that Congress. I sat down at breakfast with him and Michael Hudson, and I asked them, well, do you think China's a socialist country? They both answered yes, and I won't get into detail there. But then David Harvey made a very interesting presentation of the spiral of capital based on capital, Marxist capital. He did a great diagram. You can find it on his website. It's a very interesting discussion. And then he looked at the Chinese audience, mostly Chinese audience at the Congress, and said, there's a potential point of destabilization in your economy right here. The clear implication is their economy is based on the reproduction of capital. There are more Chinese billionaires in the United States, although not per capita, of course. But and there's foreign investment, huge foreign investment as well. So it's I would suggest you look behind the surface of the rhetoric.
I would say I'm a Gramscian, at least on one point.
Yeah.
Optimism of the will, pessimism of the intellect. I was faculty advisor to student government, and we had to go see, wanted to see I Am Legend with Will Smith. I see a scenario like that developing in a lot of places in the world before people wake up, especially because the inequality here based on labor aristocracy, white labor aristocracy. We have to get a standard of living somewhat lower to meet the other people. You cannot, what Marx said in Capital, not until capitalism is capital in Communist Manifesto, not until capitalism penetrates every pore of the planet will we, and I think there has to be some kind of, but it's going to be a long, hard struggle. Don't forget the U.S. imperialism is the worst because We dropped out of the climate accord. 192 countries for it. Trump is against it. Trump is a racist. When he was elected, I said I'm not surprised. It's a fulfillment of everything I believed about this country. The white racism is despicable because most whites coming here benefited. They all think they're middle class because they're not black. They're not black. They're middle class. No matter what happens, I won't be treated that way. And of course, we see the results looking at the conference, looking at the room, looking at everything. I teach community in college, and I'm, as I said, on the bargaining team. There are 20 of us arguing with CUNY. They didn't want to hear, CUNY management didn't want to hear 2 weeks ago when it was pointed out by our president, who's the most eloquent spokesperson for working class students of the 400,000 working class students, 400,000 in CUNY. They didn't want to hear about when CUNY ceased to be free, which was in 1975. That's when the bottom dropped out of our budget. From 1847 to 1975, CUNY was free through the Great Depression, all through these bad times. And of course, the defeat in Vietnam and then Rockefeller, David coming up with the Trilateral Commission marked the end of that ascendancy, and the decline of the working class, which people blame for on all kinds of reasons. They're refusing to acknowledge their racism, especially the neoliberals. I'm not going to talk about Trump. He's obviously a supporter of Hitler, just as Prince, what is his name, Prince Harry. I know all this stuff, so I don't want to go on. You get the message. Go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, I've heard. I listen to Max Kaiser on RT. He says that we're heading for a financial collapse. Everybody is in debt, and he said the United States might go to war as a solution. Do you think that that's plausible?
These are all the bases. Notice there are no bases. I can't see this, but they have a ton of bases in Afghanistan, a ton of bases in Iraq, which just voted in a Shiite communist coalition government. If you don't know, Shiite communist. So we can take some heart in that. But no bases in Iran, no bases in Russia, no bases in China. Well, it's all about controlling the world. It's all about full spectrum dominance. It's about the Skull and Bones, and of course, Skull and Bones was financed by the opium trade. By 1907, 26% of adult males in China were drug addicts. So the drug trade is very important. CIA is involved in it. And of course, when we had the 2004 election, John Kerry's ancestor was an opium dealer, and so was Franklin Roosevelt. And we can go on and on with this, but it's all about controlling people through drugs, the opioid epidemic. That's great because it removes 200,000 people already from the States. Yes?
Yeah, the title of this program is Resisting Empire, and I want you to bring it down to the people in this room, maybe. Not predictions, but where do you see points of most effective action?
Well, we tried. I was faculty advisor to CUNY Divest from Fossil Fuels. And for 3 years, 2013 and 15, we went to all the student governments. We even lobbied the trustees. I think that we have to seize the houses where we live. If we're renting apartments, have rent strikes, we have to. The students and the faculty should be running CUNY. The administrators have no disciplined background to speak of. It's getting to a point of polarization. That's why the increase in security. We're going to have fighting all over the place. There's going to be a lot of that. It can be nonviolent resistance, but when the other side gets violent, which we have seen. I mean, Obama was no different. He didn't prosecute one single racist cop, and it's all on the cell phones. He could, Bill Clinton could sell you the Brooklyn Bridge once. Obama could do it twice. They're slick. They're dishonest. Trump is at least up front. That's what the people like. I'm going to make America great again.
When was it great before?
Well, it was great because the whites were doing well, and everybody else was doing bad.
But, okay.
Yes.
I think Trump's election was a sort of by design, or was it sort of a fluke, something weird that happened that people weren't
It was a
prepared
fluke
for?
because the intelligence establishment was opposed. I've never seen more splits in the ruling class. And when there's splits in the ruling class, the potential for revolution is there. That's why they wanted to kill everybody off with drugs.
I just want to say that I largely agree with Tony, but the invention of the white race was to control the working class, to give some privileges to white workers relative to black workers. But it's still a mechanism of control. I would suggest you read Theodore Allen's book, The Invention of the White Race. And to understand, and I don't agree with him, that most white people actually do better because of racism. They actually do worse. And as far as politically dealing with this challenge, I think we have to show and concretely that the life could be better for the great majority of American people, white and black, especially most oppressed, by breaking white supremacy, which is more, at the last analysis, the service of the millionaire-billionaire class, not the white working class. So we can debate that. I think there's some difference.
But they believe that.
Well, they believe it, of course they believe it. That's what makes it possible to for Trump to get the vote he did. But it was not. He got more votes from the quote middle class, professional white, than he did from the white working class.